Welcome. You are at the CCC.
Where there are no outside issues. Hi, my name is Bonnie Violet. I'm a trans, femme, genderqueer, spiritual drag artist, and digital chaplain, and a person living in recovery.
My name is Anthony. I'm a 7th-year doctoral student in clinical psych, an addict and an alcoholic. I got a lot of sleep last night, so I'm feeling really good today. And as usual, I care about you.
Yes, and I'm Lulu, and my pronouns are he and him. I am in recovery for crystal meth and alcohol. I'm former Miss Castro Country Club, and I am always in search of balance.
And each week we create and provide a brave space where we engage in topics of recovery.
Yes, and our intention is to hold and inspire better spaces for people in recovery.
By tackling topics sometimes used to separate us.
But before we do that, like, subscribe, comment, and ding that bell.
Ding, 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 ding.
Okay, we have one new thing to incorporate into our opening remarks, and that is that we do not represent anyone but ourselves. The comments we shared during the show are ours alone. We don't represent the Castro Country Club or Alcoholics Anonymous or any other recovery program.
Absolutely. We are not ambassadors.
We ambassador ourselves.
Because, where's that check?
Right. Yeah, I'm like, I like, does anybody even question or wonder that?
I listened to your podcast and I believed you, and so I went and I'm suing.
So how is everyone?
I'm cute. I'm in Chicago, no longer in the Bay.
So sad.
But good. How about you all?
I'm good. Last night I had one of my advisory board meetings
that I apparently forgot about.
Yeah, we serve on an advisory board, which is amazing. But I think we spend so much time together. I love it.
We do spend a lot of time together.
That and no, honestly, things for me are really good. But actually, last night was my last official meeting as secretary. My commitment for that term has ended, and I can re-up, or I can, in the spirit of rotation, allow someone else to have that experience.
Well, that's very big of you.
Wow. Okay.
You're not just over it.
Me?
Yeah.
No. I honestly, it's like I'm such a Virgo. It's like, it's a great way for me to kind of be in control.
Why do you take all of us with you?
Huh?
Because I'm also a Virgo.
Yeah. What does that mean to you?
Yeah. What does that mean to you? Go.
Well, I think that it means that I live in structure land. I live in some type of control, and needing to control. Even if I'm not completely in control in my mind, I'm controlling things. I'm manipulating situations so that they move and flow the way I want. Because for some reason, the universe has given us permission to kind of set the tone for things.
Are there any times in your life you feel like you can let go, like where you're not a Virgo in that way?
Actually, to be fair, I am a lot better than I used to be, and I think a lot of it
sounds like a bumper sticker.
A lot of it has to do with recovery, because there were times like, how we talk about, do you want to be happy or do you want to be right? And I have found I want to be happy, and so a lot of times I just.
Why not be both?
I realize that I'm powerless over how other people show up in situations. And so when if I'm not spiritually sound, and that's the thing, if I'm not spiritually right, then that's when I slip into that behavior that can really kind of turn people off or turn myself off.
Anna is saying, it's me. Hi, I'm the problem. LOL.
Hey, yes, you are.
Hey, nice to see you.
Yes.
Ana Maria.
Ana Maria.
So I will now answer the question. I'm good. You know what? If I'm okay, keeping it 100, like I feel so. I've actually been not.
You now?
Yep. So I've been in a little bit of a funk. I was like doing so well for a while, and then I don't know what happened. And then I spoke with 2 very good friends yesterday, and they made some suggestions that I put into practice today. And one of those suggestions was, Anthony, you need to start prioritizing sleep, because I haven't been getting enough sleep. And then the other friend said that she thinks I need to take a break from big projects. So like my dissertation and getting my materials ready for my applications next year, etc. And then the other suggestion was, Anthony, like you also should probably start taking care of your physical environment, because like, for example, I had like dishes in my sink, the same dishes in my sink for like 2 weeks up until this morning. And that's usually like a telltale sign for
Well,
me. It's like,
that
what's
stuff
going
affects
on?
you. It's like,
Yeah.
I,
What is
Yeah.
going on that I'm like, I feel so
I've
drained.
always realized, and I think I got it from what your outside, your environment really kind of speaks to how
Oh,
things are.
100%. Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's when I know things are things are up with me. It's like when I start to see things like I'm not making my bed, I haven't washed my dishes, like so I put that stuff into practice today, and I'm just so grateful that I have people in my life, that can kind of nudge me in the right
And that
direction
you
when I
listen
need
to,
it.
that you can
And
hear.
that I listen
Mm.
to, yeah, that I'm
Because there are people that are blah blah blah, their words or whatever, but nothing connects because
Yeah.
you just don't jive with them like that.
Yeah, I feel that. So today's episode, excuse me, today's episode is Let's Have a KiKi Again. And for those of you who didn't catch our last episode, basically what happened is a couple weeks ago, we noticed that like once the camera stops rolling, that we continue to chat, behind the scenes. And typically what's happened is that we have these very rich, fun conversations, and we leave those conversations curious about what other people are thinking. And so we've decided to just kind of bring that to the show, is just not come in with a script necessarily, have a conversation, and then invite people into that conversation. And so I'm wondering if y'all had anything you wanted to add to that.
Well, I was thinking when we talked about like doing this again, last time we kind of, well, the conversation, like you said, it was rich. It's like it was a good conversation, but I think sometimes we go in on it and we forget that, we might forget, or it may not seem like we're focused in on the recovery aspect of it.
Right.
And I think that this is kind of like I don't remember what show we did where we had two parters where it was the show on grace, or it had something to do where we were then able to come back and say, okay, this is how this relates to
Right.
it. Because I love our tagline that there are no outside issues, but I think that one of the benefits to the listener, or even to myself or to others, is when we bring the solution to it. We can talk about stuff and complain, oh my God, but when we want to be solution oriented. So
I hear that.
And
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I was just thinking about that last episode, and part of what came up for me is, I think for example, I think our conversation was like highly political.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think that the reason why it was highly political is, I think, because to some degree that stuff does impact our recovery.
Absolutely.
Right. And I think for a lot of folks, and in my personal opinion, I think there are very few outside issues. Most things impact our mental health, and that sometimes can take people away from the rooms, or start to kind of paint how they see things. So I think it all came up because it does impact at least my recovery in some way or another. Bunny Violet, you were going to say something?
no, I was just gonna say, I hear that, and so you jumped right in there.
Right.
Before we go on, something that I realized that a lot of folks do, and they do it a lot, and I think we've talked about before, do it a lot in early recovery, where they compartmentalize. And I think that maybe it's more important in the beginning to compartmentalize, but for me, one of the things that I always had to maintain so that I wouldn't kind of lose sight is that this is not an interruption of my life. This is my life. And
Right.
I think I can put recovery ideas and everything on the shelf. I don't have to. And I just wanted to say that because
Yeah.
I had been listening to a past episode where we were talking about that and realizing,
Yeah, I think one of the great things that you said during our last episode was you were giving an example of different fellowships and different situations, and what you said is there's recovery in all of those places. And I think wherever I go, if my thinking is aligned, like say with the 12 steps or just with recovery principles in general, I am essentially bringing recovery into those situations.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Everything that the light touches is
changes.
a part of our recovery.
That's
Well-
for Lion King.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Well, and I wonder how much of it, because we came up in the same circles, so to speak, around our recovery and how we do recovery is similar. If that's part of because to me it's like, what do you mean but make it recovery, or let's get back to recovery? I wonder if that is because of where we come from, because I think to me everything is related to my recovery and everything is built upon my recovery. And it's been helpful for me now to not necessarily have to like compartmentalize, this is something I do for recovery, and then this is doesn't, and this, you know what I mean? Like it's all just one and the same. But I do think when we think about recovery, it's like those specific things maybe that we learned in rehab or out of a big book or in the specific rooms. But I think there's so much more to recovery than that, and that's great too. You know what I mean? Like it's not to denounce it or speak little of it. It's just, I think that, I don't know, it's the starting point.
Maybe our conversation was nuanced because, like you said, we grew up recovery-wise in the same circles, and so when we're talking, I know what you mean and where you're going with that. Maybe someone else who's listening who doesn't have that, that's kind of what I was thinking. It's like, you know, you almost have to make it clear, absolutely clear, because it was so sometimes it's so subtle. Like in my mind, like with you, having the conversation to me is a big part of my recovery, because if I don't have the conversation, it'll back up and really cause me some discomfort.
Yeah. And I think when we, at least I'll speak for myself, that when I talk about being recovery focused, I do think I'm ultimately thinking about being solution focused. And that isn't to say that, like, you know, some things need to always have a solution, but I do think that, at least in my experience, as someone who's sober and in recovery and like works a program, that I do have a container to put my experiences in, and I do have a way, like a lens through which I can see the world in a
if I look in the camera,
way.
does it look like I'm looking at you, Bonnie?
If I'm looking at you, I guess, yeah.
I just
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Ana Maria says, like I always say, recovery is always first. It's so a part of my foundation that no matter what, it's there. I agree,
that.
Anna.
Yes.
Me too. Samesies.
How are you feeling, Anna?
Is Anna not well?
She had said previously that she was sick.
Oh, I'm sick. I'm so
But she was happy to see and hear us.
Oh, Anna. Well, I love seeing you around when you're around.
Good vibes. Go ahead.
Yeah. So there were quite a few things that we talked about last week. And I wanted to know, like, what was on both of your minds, right? So what I guess what I'm saying is, like, I have things that I like wanted to call back to, but I also know that.
Sorry, let's go there.
Well, hold on. I also know that, like, before this episode, we were talking. Well, before we went on today, we talked about a few things, and so I'm wondering if y'all wanted to mention any of those things.
Well, I feel like what we were talking about is, like, if you want to mention it, that's one thing, because it's like, I feel like it was maybe.
Hey, why does it sound like we're being so secretive?
No. I feel like it was a conversation out, off camera.
Okay, maybe that was so. That's fair. So I think what came up for me during that conversation is that I feel inspired to say to folks who are listening in that if you're LGBT plus identified, if you're an ally of the community, I just want to acknowledge, and I got this from things that Bonnie Violet was sharing, as I want to acknowledge that things may seem kind of chaotic in the world for us right now, and for what it's worth, like, I care, we care, and as we say in recovery, you don't have to do any of this alone. So I just wanted to make sure I put that out there.
Okay, so you and I were talking about something different, but I remember that.
Okay, yeah.
I was like, you don't want to talk about that.
Yeah. You're getting ready to spill my tea. And another thing.
And what's interesting, even though people might see this at other times, it's like what you said is going to always be very relevant, just because of the challenges that the LGBTQ community face. So.
Yeah, I sometimes take for granted that, I live in San Francisco and
in the Castro.
Right? Yeah. And, I came from a very conservative city. I think a lot of us did. And, I can just remember feeling alienated and ostracized. And I came here like so many other people in San Francisco. We came from different places in the country and sometimes other countries. And, we come here because we're looking for a safe haven. And so I forget, like, that I live in this bubble where, most of the time I feel safe and I feel accepted and I feel seen, etc. All right.
Yeah. Yeah, I was listening. I saw a TikTok earlier in the week that I really appreciated, and they were talking about how how it's so much easier for queer folks to live in urban areas than in rural areas, and a lot of it happens is that we leave those rural areas to the urban areas, but is it a disservice to the rural communities that we leave? And that's something I've definitely grappled with, and I think that's actually one of the reasons why I decided to move back to Idaho was this idea of like us having to escape from home, so to speak, to to be well. I don't know. I've felt guilt at times. Like I feel like I've gotten away. Like for whatever reason, I was able to leave and I was able to find myself and get well. Whereas there was a lot more difficult for me. And as I've shared before, so many of my friends have died since I left, and so it is hard to, to be in places that aren't urban, I guess.
I think that okay, so this same situation kind of occurs with someone who is in the so-called hood or the ghetto or
Mhm.
whatever you want to call it, and they leave for education purposes or whatever, and they find success, and you have that guilt that goes with that. But I feel as though we have to take the actions that we have to take,
Yeah.
whatever we take to become who we're supposed to become. And then the key, I think, the key is not that it's not about not doing it. It's about how do you then, once you've reached or stepped out, it's looking back. It's not looking away or forgetting. I
Right.
think that's the key, because I think that individuals, it's almost like what we were talking about before, like my sick mind couldn't heal my sick mind. And I'm not suggesting that the sickness is there, but change has got to occur. And you get to see that other people get to do, be, whatever, and inspire. Hopefully, people are inspired to make whatever changes. And I feel like the actions we in the urban areas take on a regular basis has been inspiring folks in rural areas, because you
Yeah.
see all these pride groups coming up, things of that nature, and folks stepping up. So I don't know, it works.
Yeah. And sometimes I think that's really great. And other times I also feel like it can be dangerous for folks too, because they're in different environments than we are in an urban setting. So it's like we may be able to express ourselves and carry ourselves in a certain way, but if we're actually in that hometown, and I saw that really, really vividly in watching where We Are Here recently with Bob the drag queen and Shangela and them, where they were really having a hard time being in this small town in Texas, but they were so lucky or felt, and they recognized that they were so glad that they get to leave, but there were still people there that don't get to leave. They don't get to, escape to somewhere different. And
We have a thought.
yeah,
Ana Maria says, "Oh, were you gonna read
Not
that?"
if it's too safe, not if it's to save your life. I think coming back once you're older and empowered is definitely different. When you're a kid just trying to survive, you should never blame yourself for trying to survive. Amen.
yeah,
I feel that on a yeah, I for sure. This reminds me a little bit. Have y'all ever heard of the poor people tax? So it's like
I heard of the fat tax.
the fact when you're not going to the
that's
gym.
when I didn't go to the gym.
Yeah, like the poor people tax is like, so for example, I was born and raised in the projects, and I think this is like leftover from like the Reagan administration, like trickle down economics. Anyway, so this idea that like if you're poor or you grew up poor, you make it out, and then it's your responsibility to like make it big and then give back to your community. And so that's the poor people tax. And so essentially what ends up happening is that you don't actually get to enjoy your wealth, because the idea is that you're supposed to use your wealth to bring other people with you. And that's not, I fall on neither side of that
Yeah,
conversation. But I think about I naturally have an inclination to help.
Yeah.
So I don't feel compelled to out of responsibility, but it's just in my nature. And I also think that like growing up, for example, it wasn't okay for me to say, well, like I'm going into such and such career because I want to make money.
Yeah.
Right. Because the kind of like the narrative generally for folks with my background is like, well, I'm going to go back and I want to help the community. Or so that's how we've like learned to talk about ourselves, because that type of thinking has opened doors for us, like either in academic spaces or social justice spaces.
When they're having that conversation about going back and help, sometimes they only think about it in terms of monetary, and like, or like, and there's so many ways to help. Like if, like I can become part of situations to change policy. I can do
Right.
many other things, because after reading Ibrahim Kendi again, we go back to that. It's like a lot of changing some of those situations is not about just. I mean, I can give you money, but it's like that's not going to change the situation completely.
Yeah.
I can probably give you a job, but it's like if I'm part of changing policies so that people are given an opportunity to like almost on a cellular level, you know, that's a little different.
I hear that.
Mhm.
I hear that. You know, I was thinking too, after our last episode, we were talking about like the criminalization of drag.
Mm.
And I think even though that's not happening here,
Oh,
just
it
to kind of
is.
shift, not in San Francisco.
Yeah, well, I don't know. We were laughing this
About the
past
church?
weekend about the church.
The archdiocese. Yeah.
Yeah, and this happened a while back. There was a new archdiocese put into place, and I think that there was a situation where we were having our regular drag shows at the church. There is the Most Holy Redeemer,
Mhm.
and then there was. I guess there was a drag performance by one of our fellows, and I know this individual. Based on the performance, and the word getting back, we're not no longer able to have.
Drag
So
performance.
it's like it's not happening on the same level, and I respect that, but it's like it's still there, because I think that we're still barred from having any drag competitions or anything there. Not that we've outgrown it. It's like we've gotten super huge.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of things there. Bunny Valley, were you going to say something?
No. I mean, no, and I feel like I'm not saying much. Like it's like I'm in my head a little bit, but I think I'm just feeling a little conflicted, I guess, on the conversation is good and it's something I want to talk about. I'm just in my head about it a little bit, and it feels so like palpable to see like militia groups, like masked men with guns outside of you know, a drag show fundraiser, and like just all the you know, and then with like the homeland security stuff, it is, I mean, I was already feeling a little s- scared just transitioning and just getting used to my body and stuff, and then like all this other stuff, it's just like it's almost unbelievable. Like it's almost like
Yeah.
where what is going on in the world, you know?
Right. Yeah, I feel that. I feel that, and I've thought about that before too. When coming to like, I seldom go to large events just because sometimes large events stress me out. But I've thought about that. Like, yes, I live in San Francisco, but like, what is preventing some militia from coming here? So
Not that thing. Yeah.
right.
Yeah, exactly. And honestly, it's like, you know, it's not they're not a lot, but there are people here.
Oh, for
who-
sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so it's like
Yeah. I used to live in Campbell,
I
California.
lived in Campbell as well.
Did you? I used to live
I
like
lived by that Safeway
okay.
Oh, that Safeway?
and the movie theater. Yeah.
We used to live downtown. Like
Bye, Anna.
Ooh.
yeah, it was really nice. But anyway, I bring that up because there was this one day I was out with my now ex, and we were like at, I don't know, like Starbucks or something like that, and there was this basically this like parade of like these like alt-right people, and I thought, wow, I'm in California and not too far from San Francisco, and this is happening right here.
Yeah.
So since we're talking about this, Bonnie Valley, you said something during our last episode. Well, you asked a very like thought-provoking question during our last episode, where you said, you know, how do we get to a place where we are all well and it doesn't come at the expense of other people? And I was thinking about that with respect to recovery. I mean, like, there's so many different ways of trying to answer that question, and you know, my very first thought was, you know, like, what does wellness look like? You know, like, does wellness look like having every one of our basic needs met? Does wellness look like we're all having like the same opportunities? Um, so yeah, I guess I'm throwing that out there as a talking point.
Well, yeah, and I think my biggest thing in that statement is the trying to get to a place of no harm. So it's not necessarily about like whether we have access to the same, you know what, I don't know it's about that. It's just that my privilege or my comfort or my ability to blah 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 doesn't come at the price of somebody else's their shit too, you know? Like, I think that's the challenge is the harming and what is even harmful. I don't know. It's yeah, I think that's for me is it was more of the question. It's like there is enough for everyone, and I believe in abundance. It's hard to live as if like from an abundance point of view, but there is enough, but not everybody has what they need.
Yeah.
Um, because other people are getting in the way of that, whether it's their greed, whether it's their inability to see like whatever, blah blah blah, and that's kind of, I think, a bigger question. But
That saying, I'm thinking hopefully that this connects with what you were saying. But that thing, stand up for something, even if you're standing alone. I think that like there's really no way. There's really no way to get to completely get what I need without maybe stepping on what someone else needs, especially if ideology we're so far apart, especially because it was like after this past the election, like when Trump was elected or whatever and all that stuff. I shut down around folks who it was no longer, oh yeah, we just disagree. I get that. It was deeper than that. It went deeper than that. It went like deeper and harder. And yeah, yeah.
One of my favorite things that my sponsor told me really early on was she said, the 12 steps are really about clearing the path between you and God. And by virtue of clearing the path between you and God, you get to have this very wonderful life, right? And when we think about like the kind of last few steps, like the nightly inventory and the meditation and the prayer, that is about kind of clearing this path. And maybe it's idealistic and maybe kind of utopian to think that if everyone had this kind of clear path between themselves and a power greater than themselves, that I don't know that conversations would look and sound the way they do. But then I look at these very maybe pious groups, and there's very much a lot of harm is caused by those groups, either directly or indirectly.
Well, there's a lot of like war and a lot of harm caused by this belief of like what is the higher power and how do we utilize it and how do we access it and what do we gain from it? I mean, some of a lot of wars and a lot of, disagreements all kind of, I guess, come from that sort of, challenge of us fighting over higher powers, if you will, like who's higher power. And I think that's one thing that's been great about getting into recovery where I did was this idea that we didn't have to believe the same way. We didn't have to call God by the same name or even call God God, like and to me that was one, it was revolutionary to think that I could, like I was allowed somehow to call my God and my experience with God whatever I want and talk about it in whatever way that is true for me, regardless of what Lulu's experiences or Anthony's experience or anything like that, because I grew up in a religion that didn't have space for that.
Yeah, I wanted to take a moment to pause and just invite folks in. If you're listening in and anything's coming up for you, please chime in. I know I personally feel compelled to say that there is a part of me that feels hyper aware of the conversation, for me anyway, feeling charged and political. And I'm not sure how that's being received on the outside. I'd love to hear either email us at podcast@Castro Country Club .org,
or leave us a speakpipe so we
it
can
.org?
hear
Yeah, I'd love to, like it, because there is a part of me, maybe it's fear. There's a part of me is like, if are y'all at home listening to this and thinking like, man, y'all went too far, like you need to come back to something else. I'd love to hear it. I'd really love to hear it. And at the same time, I think, I'll say this and speak for us, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the things that Bonnie, Violet, and Lewis told me really kind of like in the very beginning is that at some point we wanted to try to kind of like touch on issues that can be a little charged. And
absolutely.
And so this feels a little daring to me because I don't know how
this
it's
is
landing.
the work that I do with my sponsor, because we started out in the beginning. You start out with the basics,
Mhm.
and And then as you grow and change and you realize what I need is so much more, or
Mhm.
the things that I was working on was so obvious, and so but now the things that I'm working on, especially as a Black gay man, are so subtle, and
Right,
sometimes
right.
if I'm not careful, I miss them, and so I get to kind of zero in on, and
Mhm.
I'm hoping that those people, those with us are willing to kind of take this journey with us and
Yeah, yeah.
participate in it, because it's like we could be wrong, but this is definitely for me a big part of me kind of finding relief and finding the serenity that I want through my recovery.
Yeah. Well, and I appreciate you saying that, Anthony, because I think when I was saying I was in my head, that's kind of like this push pull that I've had is like how much of this conversation to have here, what's recovery, what's not recovery.
Mhm.
And I feel like that sort of perception of recovery is limiting. And it's like, and so how can we, or even how can we apply what we've learned in recovery to that so that it becomes part of recovery, so it doesn't feel like it's this outside thing, because I think sometimes it can be this thing outside of us or even outside of our recovery, if we will, especially if we think of our recovery as like a mindset or a way of being or an understanding or a connection that we have. We can sometimes be off kilter from that, right? So I think that's the thing that sometimes I struggle with is holding all of this stuff at the same time,
Mm.
um, because I think sometimes we're told they shouldn't exist together. Like to me, I think it still gets into that idea of like you can't be a fag and like Jesus. It's that same sort of like belief. Like I think it feels limiting and restrictive and doesn't allow me to live into my fullness and to live wholeheartedly and to live wholly, as in HOL, EY, not, like to fully live within myself and be able to have all my parts. And I think that's what's going on for me. It's like, how do I, because the truth of it is most things that are political shouldn't be political. Like our lives are politicized just because we exist, and there shouldn't be any debate about that. There shouldn't be laws to change. Like that's just the way nature is. To some degree, laws is the world's morals, and laws are, and values. And so there is going to be like this battle and this fight, especially when we live in a country that's not supposed to be dominated by any particular religion, but obviously is deeply impacted by one over all of the others. You know what I mean? And that particular religion and belief system doesn't leave a lot of room for a lot of things. So I think that's the push pull in this conversation, recovery. It's like how do I take the tools that, because recovery has helped me through a lot of those difficult things. Like, so how do I tap into recovery to also, cope with these other parts of life as well? Because, practice these principles in all our affairs. How can I take these principles and apply to this outside political, conversation?
I hear that. This resonates with me a lot. Like before you started speaking, I wrote down the question, like, how can I live a full life?
Yeah.
And so much of that is like, what is my next decision taking me to? And in AA and Alcoholics Anonymous, we talk about praying to know God's will for us and to have the power to carry that out. And when I think about kind of all the noise that makes up, say, maybe the political landscape, um,
Mm-hmm.
it becomes very important for me to know how to take a second to kind of like pause and take a step back and to ask myself, what is my place in all of this,
Yeah.
and when I'm asking myself those questions, I try not to then do that work for other people too, right? Because
Right.
there's a part of me that's like, okay, I do have a strong sense of why I'm on earth, and I feel very grateful for that. And I start to mess with myself when I'm like, okay, but what about that guy, who like shot up that club? Or what about like what was going on for them? Or like, say, those people marching right now and protesting that drug fundraiser. I'm like, what is motivating them? And then, but I can't, I don't know that that's like, as a spiritual being, as a person who believes in God, as a person, like, I don't know that I don't know if those are the questions that I should be asking myself. And just realizing that all of that is so tied into this like life that I choose to live, that is grounded in recovery, that is grounded in, etc.
Well, and I think to some degree, my recovery might actually even call me to not be complicit, to not be a disservice to those around me too, you know? So it's like it's an interesting kind of push-pull that I feel like in some ways my recovery, and because of the gift of recovery, it actually causes me to become more concerned and to become more involved, and you know, those sorts of things. So it's like, but it is hard. It's still challenging sometimes to be able to combat that and still keep the serenity and the hope and the, you know, the gifts that I get from recovery. It's sometimes hard to experience in those spaces. Yeah.
I hear that. So
This is what happens. She's like, the longer you stay sober, the more more challenging it becomes. I mean, I think that like I'm absolutely trying to integrate all the parts of me. And if I'm activist here, I'm an activist, period. You know, if I'm passionate about, I'm passionate about. And it doesn't turn on and off. I just, like I said, I have to figure out how do I exist and stay sane. I guess stay sane is the key.
Yeah. Well, and
There's a
it's like
lot-
and I think part of that is figuring out how to exist in a form that doesn't, you know, impede on somebody else in like a
Absolutely.
very negative way. Because in a lot of ways, I was listening to a podcast earlier today that they were interviewing people who were in recovery who didn't use 12-step, and they talked about how AA was a religion to them because they saw all the rules and the books and the all that sort of stuff was very religious to them, in which they didn't really feel comfortable with. Sometimes I wonder if we're that in our AA-ness, that we're those crazy you know, fundamentalist kind of like, this is the only way. And so it's hard to say to know that this is the way that works for me, and to still have room for other people to have a different way of being. And I think that's something that can be really difficult, whether it's coming from, I think you've mentioned to Anthony, from this idea of like, oh my God, I have this thing called recovery and I want everybody to feel what I feel, which can come from a good place, but might not be experienced that way somewhere else. And that's why I love attraction rather than promotion being one of the values or practices of you know, the program.
Well, you said it's like it's interesting that I love that idea of attraction rather than promotion, but it takes a while before or let me just speak for myself. It took me a while before I was able to kind of really kind of understand and actually put it to practice, because you get to that place where I'm feeling so good and I want everybody to have what I'm having, and that can be a turnoff, because it can be a turnoff, especially like with our fellows who relapse and go out. It took me a while to get to a place where I'm all, you know what, I can't make someone else's experience about me, because that's what I was doing. I was making someone else's relapse or someone else's shortcomings or being human about me, and I was putting it on me, and there was no truth or there was no reality in that. It's like my actions are what would cause me to relapse, or what would cause me to act a certain way. It's not someone else's. And so as soon as I was able to see that, I'm like, you know what, my responsibility is just to love the folks and let them have their experience. And that's it.
I feel like that's kind of the answer a lot of the times, is to localize things a little bit more, so that it's not so far out here, like in a lot of ways, that it's like, what can I do right here, right now, like with my people. Like I remember like feeling that way with like all of when everything came up around race, and it was like really thick everywhere, and it felt like, oh, you want to like do everything, and it's like, well, what's my role? Well, my role is not to blah blah blah. It's just like the people in my life, maybe having conversations with them or showing up for them. It doesn't have to be like these big grand things. And I think those are the things that can kind of get in the way, maybe.
Charity starts at home and spreads abroad.
So that's interesting you say that before we start wrapping things up. But I feel like you and I arrived, during the last episode, I was talking about how I think that a lot of the changes that we're thinking about, they happen at the micro level. And that's what I was suggesting, is that, that is how, at least in my thinking, that is how you impact changes, that you start making those changes around you, and there is this kind of ripple effect. And that's again, that's part of a much larger conversation. But I think maybe the kind of takeaway for me, or the thing that I'm trying to get across, is that it isn't hopeless. That gosh, to the often overquoted, I think it was like Gandhi, like be the change you wish to be and see the world. I hate. Y'all know how I feel about like these things that like they make it into pop culture and stuff. But there's truth to that, right? Like I can, if I want people to be more accepting, I need to start being more accepting, more loving, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So on that note, any final thoughts before we start closing out?
I was thinking about that. One of the things I do when I send out my gratitude list all the time is is I include my intentions for the day.
I do. I love that you do that.
I include my intentions, and I think about the things that I'm most challenged with. For the longest time, I based them on the 4 agreements, and I put acceptance, forgiveness, things of those natures that I'm constantly, and I add it after a while, all day. Not because I have a tendency sometimes, if I'm not careful, just to focus on it right when I create the list. And then I forget throughout the day that I need to practice these things, and not just for other people, but for myself.
Yeah.
I heard that. And with all of that being said, how can people reach us?
Well, you can reach me at the gram at LouisLou86. And yeah.
And you can reach me, Bonnie Violet, at A Queer Chaplain on all of these things.
And you can reach me on Instagram at alucasccc, or if you're feeling like typing us something a little longer, you can send us an email at podcast@castrocountryclub.org. And we also we now have an Instagram that is, the podcast has an Instagram, and it's at the CCC podcast.
Yes, please join us.
Join us. Send us messages, pictures, tag us. I don't know, whatever you want. Or if you like and you're feeling chatty, you can leave us a message on our SpeakPipe, which is www.speakpipe.com/@the-CCC.
Yes, the Castro Country Club is a safe and sober community center for all people and a refuge for the LGBTQ recovery community.
We provide programs and services that help people change their lives by supporting personal growth.
Our vision is to reduce the suffering of addiction by connecting people to community, opportunity, and support. You can find more information at castrocountryclub.org.
And tune in every Tuesday at 4 p.m.-ish, where we go live in our Castro Country Club Facebook and YouTube channels. Oh yeah, find us on all your favorite podcast sources: Spotify, Apple.
And as usual, we love you. Come back next week.
Yes.
And
our holiday edition, yeah.
Holiday edition, yeah. Until soon.
All right.
Bye.